Welcome to another fast and simple development video. Today we're going to go over Java, Spring Boot, and Google BigQuery. So let's talk about Google BigQuery a little bit. I can actually upload files for CSV files into Google BigQuery. And let's take a look at a CSV file here real quick so we can understand what some of the data set might look like. Here's a CSV file, and it has some flight information, specifically some origin, destination, airline code, number of stops, and price. So we have several items for American Airline, United, British Airline, Delta, and Southwest. We can take this information and quickly insert it into the Google BigQuery platform. So let's do that here real quick. Let's go to our Google Cloud Console. And I have a project called Chat Search Me, which I'm going to use for various search mechanisms. I will eventually connect this up with Dialogflow, so I'll have some conversational chat. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and select BigQuery. So BigQuery is a paid service. If you have not worked with it before, it may ask you to set up a credit card on your GCP account. So I've selected my project ID, Chat Search Me, and so this is important to understand that this is in fact your project ID. And within that, I'm going to go through and I'm going to create a data set. The data set I'm going to create, I'm going to call flights. And then I want this to be a multi-region. Specifically, I want to make sure that this is going to be in the US. Okay, so that's the only thing I care about right now. I'll go ahead and create the data set. Great. So now that I have that, the next step is to actually import some information in here. And now that I have this data set, I can import some information into a table. And okay, now that we have our flights data set created, I'm going to click Add. And I'm going to go to Local File. And the file I'm going to select to the data that I was just viewing. That's our CSV file. And it sees that it's a CSV file format. I'm going to put that into the Chat Search Me, which is a project. The data set is going to be the flights. The table is going to be the SFO underscore JFK underscore flights table. And I will auto detect the schema. Okay, so let's run this and see how this runs. We'll create the table and that will import the data. So I created a load job and executed the load job. So now I should be able to actually view the data. So let's actually run a query in here. And I will say select asterisk from chat search me .flight.sfo underscore JFK underscore flights. Let's run this. Okay, and now we can go through and quickly see that we have all the data in here that was in our CSV. So this is one way to load data quickly from the CSV. And now that we have that in here, we can actually do basic functions with the big data. If I want to know the price of all the flights, I can quickly sum these together. And instantly it will come back. Or I can even group these. I can add airline, and I can say group by airline. And it'll go through and give me the total by airline for each one. So with big data, we can use SQL to run these query methods on the data set. It is extremely fast, whether you have a small amount of data that I have right now, or you have terabytes of data. It's very, very fast. There's a lot of complicated things you can do. I can get the average, the upper, min, and max of values all sorts of different capabilities in the Google BigQuery DML. So the SQL is quite advanced. Well, this is interesting, but this video is on Java. So we've gone through and we've showed you how to create a basic table and done some basic querying in it. We've loaded it from a CSV. But what we want to do is access this from Java, because all of our data that we might want to pump into it is going to be on our Java side, maybe from our older databases, maybe from MongoDB, maybe from Oracle, maybe from MySQL. We want to put this data up there. In addition, we want to run queries and have our services access this information rather than having to run a query, export a CSV, then having someone else import that. So these are all things that we can do quickly through Java. So we're going to go through and create a Spring Boot project. I'm using IntelliJ, so I can quickly create a new IntelliJ project. I will call this Java BigQuery. I'm going to use Maven. I'm going to create a Thomas J Consulting for the group. Artifact is Java BigQuery, and I'm going to use Java 8. The reason I'm doing that is because I have a lot of Java 8 projects I'm working on with some of my clients. Normally I would use Java 11 or 17 or maybe even 20. But for this I'm using Java 8. I'll click Next, and I will select Spring Boot 2.715 because I'm with Java 8 you can't use Spring Boot 3. I'm going to add in Lombok. I'm going to add in some basic Spring Web. So I'm going to go ahead and create this project. I'll open it in a new window. Now we'll have our new window up and running here. So the first thing I want to do is actually start this project and verify that it's in fact running. Let's go ahead and just run this empty Spring Boot project. We'll enable Lombok. And everything seems to be listing on port 8080. Great. So I'm going to go through and in the source file, in the resources, there's application properties. And I'm just going to put in here server.port equals 8080, just so we know exactly what port that this application is listing on. Okay, so that is the start of what we need to do. I'm going to add a README file in here, just so everyone knows what's going on in case I needed some notes and such, because I'll be documenting a little bit of information going on some of the configuration and setup that we need. So again, adding a README file in here, and in this file I'm going to add some information that we need. One of the things that we need in working with Google Cloud is I need to do a Google Auth login. In addition, on this project, I need to set it to the project that I'm going to use. And I also need to make sure I authorize my chat search project and set the quotas for this project and make it the application default so that I can actually make these calls. So that's just some notes I want to make sure get set up in there and people understand. So from here, let's go through in our Java source. We have our application which is already set up. We don't have to modify this at this point. I am going to go ahead and add a new package for a controller. I'm going to add a new package for a service. So we have our controllers and services. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a new controller. I'm going to call this BigQuery REST controller. And in here I'm going to annotate it as a REST controller. I will set up a request mapping, and I'll make that /API/v1, and we'll also set up SL4J in here. Okay, so we're going to be using Postman to fire this off. So I actually have a Postman endpoint, and I have one for API/v1/querydb. So let's go through and actually implement that. I'm just going to make that a get. So I'll add a get mapping, querydb, and I'm going to go ahead and create a public string querydb method. And I'm going to return a simple done right now. And let's go through and let's run the application to make sure our basic wiring is working. We'll run this in our Postman and it comes back with done. Great. So we have log4j in here. I'm going to put a couple log4j items in here. So log.info, and I can say starting querydb. Okay, so we have that. So now that we have that, I'm going to go through and add a service, and the service is going to be BigQuery service. Okay, and I'm going to annotate that as a service. I will also add SL4J, so I have logging in there. And in here, I want to have a couple different methods. The first method I'm going to have is going to be a public string, and we'll add in our query. So I'm going to call it the basic query. Basic query. And I'm just going to say basic query done. Okay, so now that we have that, I need to add a mapping, and I could do that through a constructor or through a various annotation. I'm going to do an AutoWire annotation. Again, I could have done that through a constructor as well. I'll bring this in. So we now have our basic mapping for the service, and in here I will actually return that service basic query. So if we go back, run this now, let's go under our basic query, let's add an SL4J in here. And we're just going to say this started. Let's run this. We'll open this window here a little bit. Go to our Postman, run this. Now we get back basic query done, and we'll see a couple logs in here. Started query, basic query started. All right, so we have the basics in there for that. I'm going to go ahead and stop this now, and now I'm going to go to the POM file, and we need to add in some libraries for the Google Cloud interfaces. So the first one I'm going to add in here is the Google BigQuery. And I have another entry I'm going to add in here after the dependency for dependency management. So after dependencies, right here, dependency management. Okay, so now we have these entries in the POM file. I'm going to right click on the POM file and go down to Maven Reload Project to make sure our Maven files are added in here and satisfied. Okay, so I'm going to close the POM file now. So now that what we have, we've added in here the entries that we need in the we've added in the entries in the POM file to access the Google. So the first thing we're going to do is do a basic query. And to do that, there's some libraries that we can use with the Google. And to start with, I'm going to add in some BigQuery information. And we're going to say BigQuery default instance get the service. So this is going to get the connection information that we need for Google. Then we're going to go through, and I'm going to actually go through and set up a query and build a query. So to do that, I'm going to create a query job configuration, new builder, and my query is going to be select all from chat search me flights SFO JFK flights. Remember, exactly like I did in the Google console. So we can use a standard SQL syntaxes here. Now that we've done that, we need to create a job ID because we're going to submit this as a Google job, a BigQuery job. So I'm going to use a UID random string for the job ID. I'm now going to log out that job ID. And then once we have that, I'm going to create a GCP job from that string. Then once I have that, I can actually do something with it. Specifically, I can create a job using the information, the query config, that was the query that we set up here, and to build that. So now that I have that built, I'm ready to do something. Well, what am I going to do with it? Well, I can actually fire it off. And I want to fire this off and wait for it. It's giving me an error here because it wants me to do this in a try-catch block or pass up the exception. In this case, I don't want to pass the exception, so I am going to do this in a try-catch block. Okay, so now that we have that, we can kind of go to the next step. If we got an exception here, there's really not much we can return other than saying that we failed. We failed. And I'll go ahead and log the exception. But more importantly, if we are successful, then we kind of want to take it to the next step. So let's look at a couple things here. If the job is null, then we have a problem here. And from that perspective, that's an error. And we can simply say the job no longer exists. Okay, if it is here, but it's an error, we can check to see if there's an error. Then we can say similar thing, that the job has actually failed. Job failed. Not going to go into the details, just going to say job failed. Okay, now if we have all this information. Everything's good. And we can actually go through and we can get the results. So at this point, we're going to get the table results of the query. All right, so that's exciting stuff. We have a handful of pieces of information that we can iterate over through. We can simply take this results, and we have a field value list, essentially a row from the results dot iterator, and we can iterate over these and we can print out the values. So in this case, we have the various data points that compose of our schema that we can grab. So we have the origin, destination, airline, stops, and price. And let's go ahead and grab one local variable here. I want to say total. We will then print out, we will log the values, and we'll add the totals together. Okay, so let's see how this does. We have our big data already, and we can go through and take our simple sum of the price, remove the group by, run this, and our total should be 4616. Let's go over to our Java application now, and let's run this. Let's go to our Postman and fire that off. Okay. And this says our total is 3351. Well, that's a little different than the price that we had gotten before. Our BigQuery price says it should be 4816. Let's see what we're doing wrong here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 values. We have a limit 10. So let's make these consistent. And the only reason we have the limit is to make sure we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. So let's run this again. Let's execute it. Now our total is 4816, and that is the same number that we get from our Google side whenever we sum this in the big data. This is the same value we get from the Google side when we sum it in BigQuery. Okay, so now that we have the information, we see the data is being displayed, but it's not coming through our REST service. So let's go through and actually map that into our REST service. So we can simply go through in our REST controller, and we can identify this rather than simply being returning as a string. We can return this as a list, and specifically in here, we're going to call this a list of flights. So we need to identify the flight, so we're going to create another object in here, new package called model, and in here we're going to create something called flights, a flight, and in here we're going to annotate that with data, so we use Lombok, and our flight we have a private string origin, private string destination, private integer, private string airline, private integer stops and a private double price. There we go. So now we can go through and answer this guy. So now we can go through and import this guy. Import list. And now we expect our BigQuery service to return a list of flights. Let's go look at our BigQuery service now and replace this with flights. Okay, so in here we need to have a list of flight. I'm going to call that flights. New array list of flight. So this will be a holder. Then everywhere in here that we return something now, we need to return those flights. Whether we're successful or not, we still return the flights. Maybe full or maybe empty. Okay, so now as we go through and we iterate through this list, I can actually go through and I want to add to the flights specifically from flights. So I'll create a flight and add it into that array. And if I go back to our flight model, I can add in a no arg constructor and a all arg constructor. This will make creating this item much faster. I can now create that by sending in the origin, destination, airline, stops, and price. Okay. So now if we stop this and restart the service, we have one item that we need to return flights. All right, let's try to compile this again. Let's run this. Here we go. Now we have our information back as we expected. So in here, we notice that we have a simple array. I don't like that because it's not telling us whether we got anything or back. If we don't have any data, we simply have an empty array. So we can go through and annotate this a little bit more. And rather than just a flight model, I can actually create another package. I can create another class. I'm going to call this a flight holder. And again, I'll use a long block to create this. And this is going to hold a couple different things. One thing it's going to have is the actual count of the flight. We'll also put in the status. Actually, let's make that a string. And then we're also going to add in the actual flights. flight. So now if we go back to our API, we're returning the one item. And we need to do the same thing in the service. Need to import this in here. Create a flight holder. Flight holder will now have the flights. Flight holder will now have the number of flights for the count. Initially it's 0. And the initial status is going to be failed. Okay, only if we actually get a number and a valid status will we set these other values. So for the return value, it is now the flight holder. And only here, the flight holder, we'll set success, and we'll set the count to flights dot size. Oops. Okay, so now if we go back and run this again, let's see where we're at. Our count is 15, status is success, and now we have our flights. So this is a little bit more meaningful information set rather than just an array, an empty array, etc. We can kind of tell whether the API call was successful or not. So we've gone through and shown how you can query information from Google BigQuery. And that's interesting. And we've shown how you can upload it directly into the tool through a CSV. But it would probably be more valuable for us to actually upload something from the code itself. So let's go through and let's add another API. And the other API here, we're just going to call insert DB. So I'm going to make this very, very simple. For time, I'm just literally going to copy this. And we're going to call it insert DB. In our service, in our insert DB, public string insert DB, insert completed. Okay, and that's the only thing we're going to return for now. So to insert something in here, we need to do a couple different things. We want to insert it as streaming, but I need to define some information. So specifically my project ID and my dataset ID. I'm going to actually add those as class level variables. now that I have that, I'm going to actually go through and I need to add a few more things in here. Let's go into our new method. Log info. Insert DB started. All right. So we need to get a reference to a query builder, and we're going to send in the project ID. So that was the chat value right here, chat search me. Okay, so we have that. Our next step is to create an insert all statement. And what does that look like? Well, we need to insert all the records that we're going to put in here. And we'll do that in a couple steps here. But for now, let's go ahead and assume that we've successfully done that. And then let's actually run this insert all and make it happen. So if everything is successful, life should be good, but I need to get this insert request, and to create that, we'll create a new method, get insert request, all right? And in there, I need to reference my table that I want to insert this to, okay? And then I want to create a builder, and I'm going to add something in there, and then I'm going to return that builder. Now in this builder, I'm going to add rows into this. So this is actually going to be a streaming interface. It's extremely fast. We're not doing it through DML through an insert statement. We're actually using the streaming interface, which is what you want to do for Java. This supports very, very large sets. So I'm going to add 2 rows of data. And I need to create methods to add this in here. So I'm going to say add flight, and let me define the shape of that, because this is going to be a map that I actually bring in here. So I'm going to say create flight map, and this is going to be the origin, so SFO, the destination, JFK, the airline, American Airline. Then we're going to have the number of stops. I'm going to say 5. And then we're going to have the price. Well, if you have 5 stops, maybe it's only going to cost you $125. Okay. So then we'll going to duplicate this again. I'm going to have a similar type thing, but in this case for delta. And delta might be a little bit more, and let's say it's 155. And it's going to be 6 stops. Okay, so now we need to have a create flight map, and let's go over what that's going to look like. That is going to be a private method. Private. And we're going to make that a map. That's going to be a string object. And we're passing in a origin, a destination, an airline, number of stops, and a price. Okay, So let's resolve the import for map. Okay. And we still need to fix the return. In this case, we will have a row map, and we'll return it in here. So we'll have create flight map, and this is looking for a static method. Do not see why we need that static, so remove that. And then what we're going to do is put these named values in here. So now row map, and remember these are uppercase in the dictionary. So origin, and then we can just duplicate these for the other items. Okay, origin, destination, airline stops, and price. All right, so now whenever we run this call to do the DB insert, it should add 2 more records. So let's go back to our Google Chrome and let's look at the items that we have in here. Add the raw data. Let's look at the raw data. Okay, and we have 15 items. Let's go back to our API. Let's stop that. Let's restart it. Let's go into this now and call our insert. Your application has authenticated using end user credentials from Google Cloud. We recommend that most server applications use service accounts. So that's just an authentication. I'm using my personal API, but that should be okay. Let's go through and see if this added it. We had 15 before, and now we have one with 5 stops and 6 stops. So there you go. We've gone over how to actually add data through streaming for this as well. And technically, we could create another API to actually go through and build a query. If we had a new query, we're actually just returning the sum, we could quickly do that. Or we can set up whatever we want and have this actually send in dynamic queries where we actually pull this from a database, etc. So if we have a team that sets up a bunch of APIs, we could dynamically grab data, bring it back so that you don't have to have everything up and running on Google Cloud. You could run it from, for example, AWS or on-prem system. So I hope I've answered some questions. I will put this on a Git project along with this video and link it in the description on YouTube. Again, please take a look at some of my other videos. I hope this has helped you understand some Java BigQuery interfaces, and I tried to make it from the perspective of a Java developer. There's a lot of good videos out there on BigQuery. I wasn't going to spend time to explain that to you. There was a lacking information upon how to actually integrate Java, in my opinion. I built this with Java 8. It should work fine under Java 11, 17, or 20. Hope you have good luck with this. Hope you enjoy the video. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.